That's just going back to the elephant book, because when you were talking there, it reminded me of one incredibly powerful section of the book that I'll always remember. And I think it was one of the sections that was taken out for an article in one of the UK newspapers. When they sort of provided edited highlights from the book, it was one of the sections where you were drawing parallels between the behavior of these particular elephants and a sort of gang of teenage young men in an inner city, and how the past of these elephants bore so many striking parallels with the pasts of young men in urban cities, with a sort of like lack of fatherhood, a lack of potential of parental sort of structures, a breakdown of culture, and so on. And I found that so incredibly powerful. And it was, at the time that I read it, which because it was in the newspaper, must have been fairly recent, quickly after it came out, it was sort of mind-blowing for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, I'll just recap for listeners who may not be familiar with the elephant story, is that starting in the 1990s, I had gone to South Africa, and that's when I first heard about this, is that there was these incidents of the biologists and the park rangers finding dead rhinoceroses, both white and black rhinoceroses who are endangered. And at first, you know, it was kind of astounding and very alarming. And at first, they immediately jumped to the thing, oh, it's poachers, because the rhino horn is considered to be a very powerful traditional medicine among Asian cultures. But the horns were intact. And this kept going on, and they didn't really have a clue. And then it turns out, and this was over 100 rhinoceros who were killed. It turned out that they were young male African elephants. So that was extraordinary. I mean, from the sort of the basics is, you know, elephants are herbivores. They're not carnivores. They don't have to kill other animals in order to survive and eat. They're very pacific. They're very pro-social with other species as well with each other. And everyone loves elephants because they are so loving. And I mean, not that other animals aren't, but because they're big and they have a very powerful civilization that is huge. It used to be extend across all of Africa. And then, of course, there's Asia as well. So these young male elephants, the first researchers looked at it saying, oh, well, they looked at it and they said there's a breakdown of their social structure. In other words, they were not, just like you're alluding to with humans, they were not afforded the traditional elephant society and civilization and the culture and cultural values. And so they brought in these big male elephants, because in elephant culture, babies are born into what they call the natal family, which is there's mommy and there's aunties, there's a matriarch, a senior, typically senior female, who kind of oversees and leads, although they have a very democratic way of making decisions together. And then there's other babies, and then there's teenagers. And so that's the natal family. And that's kind of the nucleus of elephant civilization, elephant culture. And the females stay within the family as they grow up. But typically the males, when they become teens, which, you know, varies, but it's between 9 and 12 years old, they're kind of pushed out or they leave on their own to join an all male older bull, which is the male, that's the term people use to refer to a male elephant group or area. So, you know, in a very kind of general way, their first phase of socialization. And then if we look at it, as I did, from the neurobiological, neuropsychological perspective, the first phase of that early development of their brain, of their mind, of their emotions, their values, everything is within the natal family. And for the males, then that second very important phase of the development, because the brain, just like with humans, is continuing to develop and to, you know, as he or she starts to experience the world, etc., with these older males. And that continues until the age of like 30 or even 35 years of age. So it's a long time. And that point is when they come into sexual maturity, which is called must, M-U-S-T-H, which refers to the secretion, hormonal secretion. So these individuals, and this is where I was looking at it from a psychological, neuropsychological perspective, what had happened prior to that is all of these young males had been survivors of mass killings. So what happened is, as apartheid in South Africa was collapsing, that both the government as well as private reserves started importing elephants, as well as other lions and the big five, back into South Africa to populate private and public reserves and parks, because they'd all been extirpated, all been killed and wiped out. So they were a very powerful economic tourist draw for ecotourism. So at that point, it was not feasible to transport a full-grown elephant. So what they would do is have these mass killings with helicopters, with guns, shooting them down, and they would kill all of the family, and then the babies, they were infants, they were 1, 2, maybe 3 years old, were survivors. And what they did is, after killing the whole family, is they would go down and they would capture these babies, tether them to the bodies, and then they would bring them in transport them in trucks into South Africa to different parks. So these particular males experienced all of that. So from the perspective of traumatology, is they experienced several severe traumas.
Mm-hmm.
So this affects brain, mind, emotions, etc. So there's the horror of the helicopter slaughter. It's unimaginable. And again, there's no way, it's not within their culture to have helicopters. And it's different than being chased by a lion. They were then tethered to, the horror of being tethered to the body, being transported. And critically, and then this ties in to the evolved nest, is that they did not experience the normative developmental neurobiology of the natal family. They were left on their own. They were brought to they were babies. They were prematurely weaned. Typically an elephant will wean around 4. They even can continue. But, it's not that, I don't want to make it sound so clinical. We're talking about, again, the whole. So you're talking about ripping apart the whole fabric of development, the whole fabric and meaning of life and experience. So these little baby males, they had to live on their own, and they grew up, and then they went into, when they killed the rhinoceros, and in many cases they sexually assaulted rhinoceroses, they had gone into must prematurely, which means, like at 12, 13, 14 years old, they were becoming, quote unquote, sexually active, as opposed to the normative, which is around 30, 35. So they had a truncated, horrific, traumatic break from the natal family. And then they did not experience this second phase of socialization, which is meaning the brain development, etc. So this is the trauma. This is complex PTSD, meaning there were several different events and sustained trauma, which really underlied their behavior and their psychological symptoms, etc.